And now, you're tuned in to RBLR, the home of Tampa Bay's Reveler Sports.
What's up, everyone? Hope y'all are having a great week. It's just me this week. You know, if you're looking for Musab and Zach, sorry to disappoint, but this week we've got a great episode. We recently had the distinct pleasure of interviewing an amazing author, Jason Vuic. He's the author of many amazing books, but more specifically Bucs related. He's the author of The Yucks. It's an amazing book about just, you know, the early days of the Bucs, because my goodness, it was yucky. It was tough. So we've got a really phenomenal interview there. And so really stick around for that. But don't worry, next week we will have the division draft reviews as promised from last week. But, you know, it's slow news week. We figured, you know, we can kick that can down the road, much like, you know, all the dead cap space money and all that. See, I'm tying it all in together. But anyways, we really appreciate y'all for tuning in. And one free way you can help support the pod is definitely to hit that like and subscribe button. If you're looking for more content like this, or if you're really eager to listen to that, you know, draft analysis for the NFC South, we'll have that for you next week. You can also give us a follow at RBLR Bucs for the Bucs specific content, or at RBLR Sports for our general content, because we've got outstanding stuff for the Rays, Bucs, Lightning, Rowdies, you name it. Tampa Bay sports is our specialty. So definitely give us a follow there. But for a little background about how I encountered this book, I was actually looking around at the Brandon Barnes and Noble, and I just found it, and I was like, well, I can't host a Bucs podcast, or I can't co-host a Bucs podcast and not read this book. Like, this is just, you know, it's too perfect. So I picked it up, read it over a weekend. It's a quick little read, but super entertaining. He gets into John McKay, the early ownership or the early multiple ownerships, how football came to Tampa. It's some really outstanding stuff. He had a lot of really great insight into the early days of the Bucs. So if you're a history buff or you're a Bucs fan, we've got it all for y'all. So definitely excited for y'all to hear this. It was a really pleasure. He was super generous with his time. So definitely stick around for that. But before we get into it, you know, it'll be right after this little ad break. But if you want to support the pod and you want some t-shirts, you want some merch, whatever you're looking for, you can find it at shop.rblrsports.com. We'll give you a promo code as well, since we disappointed you by not giving you the NFC South draft review. But use that code CANNON, CANNONS, for 10% off your entire order. All right, as we talked about, we are going to have Jason Vuic in the house. Jason is an amazing author. He wrote the book that we're going to mostly be talking about, The Yucks, 2 years of Tampa and the losingest team of NFL history. It's a wonderful book. I've read it, and it's really awesome. It does a great job of doing some in-depth look at the Bucs back in the good old days, if you want to call it that. But he's also been an author of several other books like The Swamp Peddlers, The Yugo, and the Sarajevo Olympics. He's been reviewed by the Tampa Bay Times, the Boston Globe, the Los Angeles Review of Books. You know, he's for real. He's probably the coolest guest we've had in the history of the Bucs show so far. So I'm really excited. Jason, say hello to everyone. How are you doing tonight, my man?
Hey, I'm great. I'm thrilled to be with fellow Bucs fans, because I am one.
Absolutely. So speaking of, you explained it in the book a little bit, but how did you actually become a Bucs fan? Were you from the area, or how did you?
Well, I grew up in Punta Gorda, about 100 miles south. I'm a Florida kid, small town. I was born in 1972. And so I had the great fortune or the misfortune of becoming a Buccaneers fan right when they had this window of winning. They were terrible for the first 2 years, which is my book. And then Doug Williams shows up, and they have about 4 years. They make the playoffs like 3 times. Mm-hmm. And then Doug leaves, and the franchise falls apart for, 14 losing seasons in a row. And so I when you're about 7, 8, 9 years old, guys know, that's when you kind of fall in love with your team for the first time, when you've got your football cards and your posters. And so Doug Williams was my hero. I actually met him and got his autograph. My favorite Buck of all time. And I just always was a fan. My parents were Dolphins fans, and they knew winning. They had gone to the Super Bowls when they were really good, and the incredible Bob Greasy years and Don Shula. I didn't have that. My Bucs were losers, and I love them for it. I was a Buccaneers fan all the way through. My town's about 100 miles away from Tampa, so Tampa was the big city. and we would go up to Tampa for boiling hot football games, leave a Sunday morning early, go there and get burned to a crisp, watch a game, and then come home at night and get up for school on Monday morning. That was my life as an early Bucs fan.
Yeah, I mean, it's hot now. I'm sure, I can't imagine how hot it was back then. Yeah, that's definitely
absolutely the old sombrero where we used to go.
That's right. I was just about to ask if that's where you.
Oh yeah,
most of those games, absolutely. So we obviously the crux of the book is mostly about that 76-77 year, and the big storyline is that they lost the first 26 games of the franchise's history. And what exactly made the Bucs so bad? Like, why were they this bad?
Well, there were two reasons early on. Later, it became the owner, and it was all about the owner. But in the very beginning, the NFL, when teams would expand, would give them nothing. There was no free agency, none, and you got very few extra draft picks. Right. So it was a weak draft in 76. And then they didn't get very many draft picks, and there was no free agency. So they literally had guys from the World Football League that failed, guys from the Canadian Football League, guys that would come in off the street to try out. They'd come in off the street to try out. They were losing so many players during the year. They weren't very good anyways. And then the other reason was John McKay, the first coach. People go lightly on McKay today, but he was loved and hated in Tampa Bay. He was a Nick Saban-like star college coach. I believe he won 4 national championships at USC. Arguably the best college football team of all time was his 1972 team. They just many draft picks and Hall of Famers and just murderers row, and they were 13-0 or something. And McKay insisted it was his way or the highway. He was very dictatorial, and he wanted to run and show pro coaches that this forward pass kind of game was silly and that he could win using the I formation.
Student body right?
Student body right, student body left, but that worked in USC where they had, Hall of Fame linemen, that were from LA, number 1 pick linemen. Then they had O.J. Simpson, right? Ricky Bell. They had Heisman winners at running back, big tough backs, big tight ends. You could control teams, right? You're playing Oregon State, man, and he believed that you could do this in the NFL. And he to his credit, he did do it in 79, but it's like a war of attrition. You're going to lose players on the field. You're going to get hurt. Linebackers are, especially in those days with the arm bar and the horse collar. I mean, there aren't many backs that are going to be that durable, and not many linemen that are going to be that durable to run that type of very repetitive and very obvious offense that the pros were just going to eat up. And so McKay didn't have the players, and he insisted game after game after game that they were going to win this way. And so while other teams like Seattle, which won, I think 2 or 3 games the first year, they had Jim Zorn, the quarterback. He could run like hell. He wasn't throwing well, but you could make something happen, right? Like a Gardner Minshew, you know what I mean? Like something, you can make something happen if you just let the guy go. And McKay was like college left, college right. And teams that played the Bucs would be like, they're going left. Right. And it'd be a scrum. And there were games where the Bucs, I remember one game, I think they played the Chiefs in year 2. And one of the writers said the Buccaneers averaged less than 2 yards of play for the game.
Whew.
And in one game, it was like 1.3. And someone noticed, a reporter said the Buccaneers could have 7 downs for a first down and still not have gotten it.
That's right.
Right? That's John McKay, man. I mean, and so eventually he gets a quarterback, Doug Williams. He gets a tough defense. He gets Ricky Bell. His line, Charlie Hanna, he gets a line, and it gels. And the NFC is a little weak that year. And he pummels, into the playoffs, and he pummels his way almost to the Super Bowl. But it's hard to do, right? And so those two things put together made a team that had incredible injuries. They were that first year, there were guys on the team that the Bucs had numerous guys that first year by the end of the year that would play one game, get a check, and never play in the NFL again. One game, right? One guy on defense was brought in, a former USC guy who was, living in the inner city of LA. They brought him in against the Steelers in Three Rivers, probably the best NFL team of all time. The famous Steelers teams. And he was told, just blitz every down. He was like 185-pound linebacker and told to blitz every down. And,
poor guy.
there was no hope for the team once the injury started. And the quarterback was Steve Spurrier, which a lot of people forget, the great coach, the old ball coach of Florida. Spurrier was at the very end of his career. Mm-hmm. He was, and I brought up Gardner Minshew again. He was like a Minshew type. Athletic enough to be there, crafty, smart, probably not going to give you much more than you see, but still a very good quarterback who sat the bench for 10 years and gets a chance to be a quarterback in Florida. And so he thought, this is great. I'm going to do this, and quickly realizes we don't have receivers. We're running the ball every down. We have no line in this hot sun. And lastly, I want to say something about McKay and he was really tough, sarcastic, and mean, mean towards his players. And so even Doug Williams said, we stayed out of John's way, and Pat Toomey, one of the great early Buccaneers, said, at first his sarcasm, he would make fun of players, he would say, funny things like, we can't win at home. We can't win on the road. What we need is a neutral site.
Right.
That's funny. But then when he turns it on you,
then
one of the stories I heard was at the end of the season, he said, how many of you guys are staying in Tampa Bay? This is in the locker room after going 0-14. How many of you guys are staying in Tampa Bay in the offseason? And they're thinking, to work out, we're going to run track. What are we going to do? Are we going to lift weights? And he's like, come by and get some fake noses and glasses for your sorry sons of bitches. Come by my office. Like, even guys who were decent were like, what the hell, man? I know we're bad, but where's the uplifting talk in the locker room? And he had no problem throwing the team under the bus. One time he said, why are you asking me? I didn't run the ball. I mean, imagine a pro coach today saying that kind of stuff. And so reporters loved him. And his one-liners became legendary. What do you think of your team's execution, coach? I'm in favor of it. Which I found out he probably didn't say. That's like 100-year-old line about a girl playing a piano. The Marx Brothers used to say it, but it fits. And by then, the whole country knew John McKay and his one-liners. One time in the 80s, he had a kicker, Bill Capice. I think it's pronounced Capice. Florida State guy. He missed a field goal, lost a game, and he cut him immediately. Just sent him home. And they said, what about Capice? And he said, Capice is kaput. The guy had no conscience. And so the players, I would never say the Buccaneer players love John McKay. I would never say that they ran out on the field behind him and were willing to go through a brick wall for him. They were terrified of him. They were terrified of being cut. They were terrified of being cut in the press by him, mocked and ridiculed. Even Pat Hayden, a family friend, a quarterback at USC, was, in the USC blue blood, said he wasn't a benevolent dictator. He was a dictator. Right. You know what I mean? And so that was McKay. I think he's one of the great NFL football figures of all time. And he did in year 4 take the Bucs one game from the Super Bowl. He did what he said he was going to do. And so I'm glad I was not a pro football player playing for John McKay, but at the same time, he proved that the I formation could win in the NFL and damn near made the Super Bowl. And so I have to admit, I admire the guy, though I find him problematic. As a writer, I love John McKay. He's awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah, he's a great subject. And it was really interesting reading about him All those quotes were amazing. Yeah, I mean, they're all great one-liners. You really can't pick a favorite. But there obviously there was a lot of bad associated with McKay and these Bucs. Was there any statistic or kind of number or figure that you were like shocked at how bad it was, whether it's on or off the field? Because I know the ownership was a big problem in those early years. So,
well, I mean, the numbers are what you would expect, honestly. Year 2 was when it got even worse. Spurrier was at least a decent game manager. The next year, they had one quarterback after another get hurt, and they were putting in. They had an NAIA rookie as a quarterback for 4 games in the second year. NAIA. Yeah. I mean, tiny. He went 0-4.
Right.
You know what I mean? Getting sacked 9 times, that kind of stuff. The first year they were outscored each game 29-9. 29-9, right? They didn't have their first touchdown pass until like week 5 or 6. Man. Right? I mean, their leading running back had 1 touchdown.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just, it's what you'd expect from the bad news Bears. And I blame it all on the league. And I blame it all on Spurrier's, on McKay's insistence on the I formation. But the other thing was, what shocked me more than that was the owner, Hugh Culverhouse. Hugh Culverhouse had to have been the cheapest owner in the history of the NFL. He was a tax attorney who worked for the IRS, who left the IRS like in his 30s, maybe even his 40s, to start his own firm, to teach businesses how to come to Florida and teach wealthy people how to come to Florida where there's no income tax. Right. He would help firms. And he was always taking a piece, hearing about deals, getting into deals. So this is a guy who had a decent salary, but was middle class into middle age, who then made enough money to buy an NFL franchise. But I think that hurt him. What I learned from Hugh Culverhouse was, you want a Mark Cuban. You want someone who's got so much money and is passionate about your team, who's willing to buy anything they want because it doesn't matter. Absolutely. When you have an owner who knows the value of a dollar, like Hugh Culverhouse, that guy never had cash. All his money was in deals, in land, in the team. He's a smart man. And so the story about Hugh Culverhouse was the Bucs could lose, but Hugh Culverhouse never lost.
That's right.
He never had a bad year, right? Mm-hmm. And there's stories about the guy well into the 80s, into the 90s. The Buccaneers didn't have free drinks in the locker room. They had water in coolers like your high school, and they had Coke machines. And so reporters would tell me, like Leroy Selman would be like, "Hey, man, I'll give you a story, but you got a quarter? I'll pay you that." Leroy Selman needed a drink. They didn't have food. They didn't, I'm sure now you go to the Bucs, it's like a buffet. There's probably anything you need on earth to get these guys ready. It's sport drinks, energy, whatever they want. Hugh was so cheap. One player, they were playing the Colts like in the first 3 or 4 weeks and just got murdered. The Colts were great in those days. And a player separated his shoulder and he couldn't lift his arms up over his head to get his jersey off. So they cut it off. The guy's working on him. And he got home and there was a bill for the jersey in his cubbyhole. He billed the jersey. One of the stories that in answer to your question, the biggest factoid that blew my mind was when the Bucs first started. They didn't even have a name yet. They didn't have a headquarters yet. It was just a franchise. There was a secretary, a person, a ticket guy, GM, and Hugh Culverhouse. And they got a suite or 2 at the Airport Host Hotel. Doesn't exist anymore, but it was a big airport hotel. And they're meeting, this general manager, Bill Markham, and Hugh Culverhouse are meeting with the manager of the hotel. And he's like, well, okay, we need not a fax machine. This is early. They need a teletype machine. We need a teletype line. We need several phone lines. We need this furniture, some desks. And the guy said, sure. We get everything you need. And then Hugh goes, and you're going to have a lot of press on the host hotel. I think you should pay for our letterhead.
What?
The owner of the Bucs was so cheap. He bought a $16 million franchise and wanted someone else to pay for his letterhead. I mean, what's a ream of paper cost, man? I mean, and that was the level of his, well, what's the word, parsimoniousness or whatever, his frugality was crazy. And so at first it didn't matter. The contracts weren't great through the 70s, but as the 80s progressed, Hugh realized that there was a period in there in the 80s where a first round draft pick would get a signing bonus of a couple $100,000, right? Where there'd be a guy on a 3-year, 4-year deal that made less money in a year. So Hugh was like, first round draft picks are bad because I got to pay them.
Right.
So let's trade them. Let's trade our first round draft picks for an older guy with a set contract. Like that's the level. And so year after year after year, the Bucs would trade away their first round picks. Are you kidding me? I mean, sometimes it was a bad decision. We need help now.
Right.
Let's trade it away. But when Hugh heard, okay, great. McKay's not thinking in those terms. Hugh's like, shoot, we don't want Willie Gault, or we don't want Dan Hampton, or we don't want, Refrigerator Perry, whoever, because they're going to command more money than the knuckleheads on our team. Right. And so, year after year after year, you gut your franchise, you gut your personnel. One Buck Place was the tiniest. The original One Buck Place was small as or the same size as the Buccaneers weight room today.
Right. Yeah.
The weight room today is the same size as your original headquarters. They had 2 fields right next to the airport. That was it. And I mean, it was shoestring at every level. And so, talented people who worked for the Bucs didn't want to work for the Bucs. They wanted to leave. Coaches wanted to leave. And you'd be amazed at how many quality personnel guys were with the Bucs. Quality assistant coaches that became legendary coaches were with the Bucs. It just permeated the organization. And so after the first, 2-26 for the first 2 years, then 5 wins, then 9 or 10 wins, and then a couple of decent years, and then 14 losing seasons in a row.
Yeah.
14 losing and 10 lost seasons in a row.
Oof. Yeah.
And so even today, and this pains me, but a lot of the younger Buccaneers fans watching, the Buccaneers are still the losingest franchise in the history of the NFL. I looked it up, as I mentioned before. It's like a 405 win percentage.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's amazing. In the last 20 years, how much winning the Bucs have done in the last 25 years. It's a good franchise. It's not a losing franchise. And so that's what I wanted to kind of explain in the book, that the Buccaneers at one time in America were synonymous with losing. They were, if the NFL had, the Steelers were winners, the city of champions. Dallas was like, Texas is larger than life, the New South. The Raiders were kind of symbolic of like misfits and biker gang, like anything went there as long as you played on the field. The Buccaneers were known in elementary schools throughout America as losers. Yeah, we're the Raiders, you're the Bucs. Like, it was a joke. It was a joke to be a Buccaneer, to be a Buccaneer fan. And so I wanted to touch on that. Maybe I'll do a Yucks part 2, about the Yucks through the 80s, because that was when the losing was unbelievable. The 1-15, running Steve Young out because they said he couldn't play in the NFL. Yeah, good luck with that one. When Bo Jackson refused to play for the Bucs. Lots of other stories like that. Terrible picks. Just amazing early history of the franchise that I was thrilled to see change. Thrilled with Rich McKay and Warren Sapp and Derek Brooks and John Lynch and, on Mike Alstott and on and on and on. Brad Johnson. Those guys were heroes to me. So that's that's the history of the Bucs that I touch on. It hurts a little bit, but it's kind of funny. And it's our team, right? It's the history of our team.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of interesting. I'm pretty sure it was from your book. There was a quote about, at first it was funny how bad the Bucs were. Like, it was historic. And then the 80s hit and it was like, oh, the Bucs are just bad. Like, it's no longer like, it's no longer like,
that was told to me by Dick Crippen. He was
Right,
a
that's
local
right.
news guy, and then he became high up in the Devil Rays organization.
Yeah, I've met Dick Crippen. Very nice guy.
Yeah, Dick's a great guy. Knows a lot about the history and was super helpful. And Dick was like, the beginning was fun because, we'd get our ass beat by the Steelers, and then you get on the plane and go, yeah, but it's 7 below here. I'm going to the beach, suckers.
Right.
And the fans would come down. But then when McKay left and Doug Williams left because Culverhouse was a miser and ruined the franchise, Crippen was like, yeah, it wasn't fun anymore. We weren't unique. We just stunk. And we couldn't get out of it. As long as Culverhouse owned the Bucs, we couldn't get out of it. And so, these early Bucs, there was hope there. And there was they almost went to the Super Bowl after losing. You're looking at this franchise that was 7-30 something that the next year almost makes the Super Bowl. I mean, that's remarkable what the 79 team did. And to this day, I see Leroy Selman and Jimmy Giles and Ricky Bell and Doug Williams as my heroes. I mean, those guys, phenomenal.
Yeah, absolutely. So it sounds to me like you kind of found them lovable losers. Like, they were, looking back, it's tough, but it's also your team. So did you find that was kind of a shared sentiment as you kind of interviewed people and did your research and stuff like that for the book? Did you kind of find that it was everyone loved them despite their losing?
Yeah. Unfortunately, there weren't a lot of Bucs from the 76 and 77 teams that were there in 79.
Right. Yeah.
There were a lot of guys that was like, yeah, I lost every game I played as quarterback, and I'm seen as the worst quarterback in history, or, I had 1 touchdown and fumbled 7 times. Like, you'd interview guys that the Bucs were their only pro. I wonder what that's like to talk about.
Yeah.
I mean, they got a cup of coffee, right? They were one of the best players in the world, and most people would give their left arm to be in the NBA or even for a second or to be in the NFL. So I never disparage these guys. I mean, and I tried not to make fun of them in the book because, one, it was the circumstances. Pat Toomey played for the Bucs. He was a lineman, played a defensive lineman, sack master, left the Bucs, and probably, it was unofficial, the sacks in those days, but I think he had the most sacks for the Raiders one year, the most in the league. I mean, this was a badass dude who just happened to have the horrible luck of being selected by the Bucs in the expansion draft, So I tried not to make fun of them because some of these guys were college All-Americans.
Yeah.
These were pro football players. So yeah, they stunk as a team. So I forget your question. Sorry.
No, you're good. Yeah, it was you pretty much answered it. It was kind of like I guess I was more focusing on the fans. Like, did the fans seem to still enjoy the Bucs and
yeah. I mean,
lovable losers kind of thing.
Yeah, there were some, there were a lot of fans that didn't like McKay.
Right. Of course.
So he got a lot of brutal, F you, and they'd throw stuff at him. And in those days, to bring this to a more serious level, but I think it's part of the books that Bucs fans should be aware of. There was a little bit of uneasiness in the 70s in Tampa, which was still a southern city with black players.
Absolutely.
There was a lot of racism. People were assholes. And when I was a kid, why I loved Doug Williams was he was a black quarterback in a white uniform. And he was awesome. He could throw the ball 75 yards in the air. He was a bad dude. And so to me, that was awesome. For my sensibilities, my parents were never racist. And I thought that was killing. No one looked like Doug Williams. No one in the league. And other people didn't like that. Older people. And Doug, in his memoir, writes about, receiving, this is horrible shit, receiving a watermelon in the mail, people throwing chicken bones in his yard in Carrollwood. They didn't want him in Carrollwood because some of the stars decided to move into Carrollwood. They didn't want black people in the neighborhood. And so McKay, I have to say, could be a real bastard. But one time people were yelling at Ricky Bell the first year. He was the number 1 pick over Tony Dorsett.
Right.
And so people were mad. Well, it wasn't Ricky Bell's fault. Dorsett had a championship team that he walks into. Of course they're going to block for him. Ricky Bell would have scored 5 million touchdowns for Dallas. McKay needed a durable back, and he chose his durable back. And Ricky had a bad first year. And fans would throw stuff at him and yell the N-word.
Mm-hmm.
And one time, I have to say I like McKay for this. He was never racist. McKay was just an all-around asshole. Like, if you stink, you're out. I don't care what color you are. I mean, he said that all the time. I'd bring in the guy's Japanese if he'd win. I don't care. But one time the fans were getting at Ricky Bell, and McKay tried to run into the crowd. And I admire that, right? And so there were some dark times there. The players told me that they used to go to a steak and ale on Dale Mabry that probably doesn't exist anymore. And they would go there after the games, and could go in the back room where they had that sliding partition. Mm-hmm. And they could go back there and kind of hide and drink and party. And they said when it was like 2 or 3 in the morning that it was safe to go home. They didn't want to be seen. Rich McKay said when he was a junior high kid at like Jesuit, I think he was a Jesuit. He used to shop at the grocery store for his mom and dad because he didn't want anyone. They didn't want to go in.
Yeah.
Do the family shopping, right? And so there were some bad periods there, but I have to say that the first year they lose every game, and they're on Johnny Carson, they're on national news as the worst team. George Carlin's making jokes, Red Fox. I mean, everyone is ripping on the Bucs. Everyone is ripping on the Bucs. The next year, they're even worse, and attendance rose. Right? So people embrace the Bucs, and by the 80s, when they were horrible, the Bucs didn't sell out every game, Right. They didn't sell out many games.
Right.
Most of their home games were blacked out. You couldn't watch the Bucs.
Yeah. But
the core that was there, the 48,000, the 51,000, Tampa Stadium was huge, right? Those core fans, there are still fans today who had season tickets in 76. Think about that.
Yeah, that's
We're almost at 50 years.
Yeah.
Right. And those are fans, man. And so for us, hating our owner, wondering what the hell was wrong with our coaches, wondering why we picked that guy and not that guy, right? That was part of being a Bucs fan.
Of course.
Now to me, I hate this because I know your listeners are probably diehard Bucs fan. I find them less interesting now as a good franchise than when they stunk. I mean, I did, honest to God, some days I love Bucco Bruce. I want to get rid of these jerseys now, get rid of the helmet, go back to the orange, go back to the gay blade, please. And that's when I'll jump back on the Bucs bandwagon. Come and win the Super Bowl and kick ass with Bucco Bruce on your helmet. That's what I want. That would be the ultimate ode to my Buccaneers,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, shoot, it would have been awesome to see Tom Brady in a Bucco Bruce.
I thought of that all the time.
Yeah, it was a real missed opportunity if we're being
right.
Yeah, it's kind of a shame they waited just a year too late. But yeah, I don't know. But are there any details or stories because I mean we can talk all night about this.
Whatever, yeah.
Amazing.
Well, I'll tell you one funny story. I thought about this. You sent me questions and I thought, and I, like any book, you get stuff that might be a little too raw or too personal. Right. And, I'm never out to skewer people in my books, though I do write about crazy things. I did hear a great funny story that the first season, it's the end of the year. The Bucs are, they're down to I think that Pat Toomey told me, I believe 3, maybe 4 players were starting in the last game that started the first game, right? I mean, guys off the street, they'd introduce themselves in the huddle. Right. Hi, I'm John. How are you? Good to meet you, right? One guy was a construction worker.
That's right.
It was that bad. And so they're going on the road late in the year to play the Raiders. Oof. I mean, this is one of the great teams of the 70s. I believe it's, the Raiders had won a Super Bowl before that, and they were going to win one in 80s. This is the height of the Raiders.
Mhm.
And they're going out there and they are literally, I think it was one of the largest point spreads in the history of the NFL. Or if not, for a long time it was like a 30-point spread, something unheard of, right? I don't know. You got to look it up. But
No, for sure.
they're going out there and they're on an airplane that's not Eastern or United or American. It's McCulloch Chainsaw's airplane.
Mm-hmm.
It's a Boeing that the owner, Hugh Culverhouse, had rented from a friend who owned McCulloch Chainsaws. So it's like they're flying around in the jet of a company, right? It's just lowbrow. And they fly out there and they land in Oakland, and already the veterans are tired of McKay, and he doesn't like veterans. He hates them and they hate him, and they just want the season to end. And some guys are retiring. Like, they know this is it. I can't do this again. Nobody wants me. I'm a loser. I'm 30, which is an old man in those days.
Right.
And they're getting off the plane on the tarmac, like Nixon, coming down the steps. And what pulls up but a black limousine hearse? A hearse. And McKay doesn't like veterans.
Right.
Does not like them.
For sure.
And he cleans house. The season ends and he gets rid of almost all the veterans.
Mm-hmm.
And Bob Moore was a former Raider. He was the first pick in the expansion draft, the very first Buccaneer.
Mm-hmm.
He was a good tight end for the Raiders, but they got Dave Casper, who's a Hall of Famer.
Yeah.
And so he was out.
Right.
And they put him in the expansion draft, and he's like, damn it, I got to go to the Bucs. I don't want to go. Smart. He's a lawyer, Stanford grad, smart dude. And he's like, this is awful. And the game before, 2 games before, Time Magazine asked him, what's it like playing for the Bucs? And he said, it's like being on the aft deck of the Lusitania. Right? And he said McKay read that and he was pissed. Not only does he not like me anyways, but he's pissed that, and he said McKay was mad at me, not because I said that, but because he didn't say it.
That's right. Quote.
So Moore comes out and McKay sits in the way back. He sits in the far back of the plane always. He never sits in the front ever.
Right.
Sits alone in the back drinking vodka. And someone asked him, why do you sit in the back of the plane, coach? And he goes, because when we hit a mountain, all these sons of bitches are going first.
That's right.
I mean, that's his team. And so they're getting off the plane and all the players are like, what is this hearse doing here? And Bob Moore starts going, yes, he's excited. And they're looking at him and he runs down the steps with his bags and jumps in the hearse. And it's full of his former Raiders teammates. And it's the Raiders party barge.
Oh my gosh.
The Raiders team had a hearse. And I asked a couple of them and no one knows who owned it. It's just their company car. They would all take it out drinking. Like 10 Raiders would pile into this car. And somebody said, Bob's coming. Let's go get him. And so they picked him up and he went out drinking all night. As they're driving away, McKay looks and he's like, son of a bitch. He just sees his player leaving, right? And they got murdered, just 50 something to 49 to 14 or something, like just murdered. And that was emblematic of the season, that the players were done, the coach was done. And so I got a lot more stories like that, but it was fun to hear. One other good one. I'm sure they do it today in Tampa, but teams do this. Like, you'll have a player and they'll have a section of the crowd that'll be like Leroy's leaders, or
right.
They'll name a section and everybody there is supposed to root for whoever. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's organic. Other times the team does it.
Right.
Carrie's corner or whatever.
Yeah. Randy Land for the Raiders.
Yeah. Well, the Bucs had a kicker, Dave Green, who was absolutely hilarious. You need to have him on. He is absolutely hilarious. Should be a talk show host. He was the punter. And he would punt from the end zone all the time, like hundreds of times. I don't know, like dozens and dozens of times with his ankles right on the edge. It's 4th and 30 from the 1 foot line. And in the end zone were all of the people that were in wheelchairs. That was the wheelchair seating. People, that were, special needs, and they would sit in the wheelchairs, and he punted so many times that they became his fans. At the end zone was where they had a sign. It was Dave Green's cheerleaders, and they were all in wheelchairs. And there was a reporter sitting with them and interviewing this group of fans, and they're about to punt. And, I don't know who's coming. It's someone is about to murder him. And he looks over, and they're hiking the ball, and he's like, "You want to trade places?" In the middle of a game, right? There's just so many of those stories, guys. I interviewed a receiver who played 6 games, caught no passes, but he threw like a trick play, like a flea flicker for 35 yards. So his entire NFL career was 1 pass, no receptions. Hey. Over and over and over, guys like that, just head scratchers.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely, it's a blast to read about for sure, but it's also a bit like, oh man, this hurts.
Fans, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like, oh man, these are so bad. So we spent a lot of time talking about the bad, but you're a Bucs fan. So who's on your Mount Rushmore for the Bucs? Like your
Doug Williams, number one. And I don't say that lightly.
Of course.
Because I was working at Ohio State. It was in the cold when they won the Super Bowl. Mm-hmm. And I was watching that game, and I opened my window on a freezing night and yelled as loud as I could in my downtown apartment, "Buccaneers are champions. Fuck you. I am so happy." I was beyond the pale. Mm-hmm. So come on. I watched those clips today of Derek Brooks and Warren Sapp and John Lynch just murdering guys. And those highlights of Mike Alstott. Come on. How many Bucs fans watch those on YouTube? Yeah, just give me a break. Okay. So I know how great those guys are, without a doubt.
Absolutely.
But to me, Doug Williams, and he had I don't know what his record with the Bucs was, like 35-35 or something. Right. But that was like Babe Ruth, Johnny Unitas, and Joe DiMaggio put together.
For sure.
I'm not lying. Tough. The team was running McKay's offense, and it was like they said the moment he came out of Grambling, walked out on the field, he was the leader.
Yeah.
Not Leroy Selman, who, was unbelievable, just a gentle giant and one of the great Bucs. Rightfully has the expressway named after him, right? But there wasn't a question the moment he stepped on the field that he was the leader. The moment he got there, that this guy wasn't joking. And the Buccaneer franchise turned on a dime. They went from and so that to me is the key. It wasn't the winning record, it wasn't the stats. It was, what did you do? You know what I mean? And what did you accomplish? And the franchise he took over was beyond bad.
Right.
It was what he did to make the Bucs win, along with others, Ricky Bell, the running back. They just changed the franchise. They took a team that it was 2-20. Imagine being a rookie quarterback given the ball of a 2-26 franchise. Right. You wouldn't do that today. These guys get 3 years, 4 years. The Packers quarterback got 3 years to study? Aaron Rodgers,
right. Yeah,
studied for 3 years. That's like getting a master's degree in football. Doug came from a historically black college into the NFL.
Yeah,
it's like 5th or 6th game they broke his jaw. Got a cheap hit from a Rams, and they wired his jaw, and he came back the next year and almost went to the Super Bowl, right? And to me, Doug was always my hero. I put Leroy Selman, Ricky Bell. Those are the 3 that I put on there from that period. In the 80s, James Wilder, come on, tough as nails. And there's some other guys that are large. Paul Gruber was a star offensive lineman, one of the great Bucs that played on terrible teams, and he just sucked it up and he played for a decade. Right. And then all the guys, in the 2002 year, I mean, come on, that whole team was Simeon Rice and Booger McFarland and Robert Kelly, Michael Kelly, Robert Kelly, Kelly, just so many. Grammatica, come on, they were all heroes to me. But so I'm going to anticipate your next question. You know, what was a more impressive Super Bowl? Who do I like more? You know, the Tom Brady Bucs that won the Super Bowl, or the early Bucs, or the 02 Bucs. Right. And I would say 02, because of the weight of history. Mm-hmm. The Buccaneers, when Warren Sapp got there, when Derek Brooks got there, when John Lynch got there, they were horrible.
Right.
When Tony Dungy got there, they were, I mean, I can't even emphasize that enough. I mean, this is one of the worst franchise up in that point, the worst franchise in the history of the NFL, one of the worst in all organized sports in America.
Yeah.
And so when they came there, Warren Sapp, I remember in his memoir, he said, we called them the Yucks.
Right. I
didn't say that. Everyone did. Everyone did. Warren Sapp called them the Yucks. He didn't want to be signed there. He didn't want to go there. Mm-hmm. Bo Jackson wouldn't go.
Right.
Agents didn't want to do business with Hugh Culverhouse. Coaches didn't want to coach there. Everyone wanted out. And so what that team did in 02, that 5-year attempt, it was like 5 years. They fought like dogs with the Packers to try to break through Brett Favre to win the Super Bowl, to break through the Rams, who were amazing with Kurt Warner. So what those guys did, I think they carried the weight of history on their shoulders way more than Tom Brady and these other guys. But winning a Super Bowl, come on, it's unbelievably difficult.
For sure.
For anyone. And so I'm not going to denigrate what Brady's teams did, those guys. They're in Mike Evans, unbelievably gifted football players who did the hardest thing in sports. But I think they didn't carry that weight. They were never losers.
Right.
They might have had some down years. Evans went through some down years when he got there. But nobody went, Bucs, losers. He didn't have fans wear bags on their heads.
Right.
The Buccaneers in the 80s and the 70s, there used to be someone who put a sign on the 10-yard line that said, the buck stops here. Right? I mean, their own fans mock them. And so I think what the 02 Super Bowl winning team did was so beyond the pale. There were journalists in 02 who cried that had been with the Bucs for 30 years. And they wrote the next day, one of them wrote, I can't believe I'm typing this. My hands are shaking.
Yeah.
We won the Super Bowl. We won the Super Bowl. Like, you know what I mean? And the Bucs were that bad for that long. 14 losing seasons in a row.
Yeah.
And so for Warren Sapp and those guys to break through that, I mean, those were men. I mean, to do that was way beyond, the average team would say. Like for the Lions now, they weren't coming from such a dark place as the Bucs, but still, are they going to push through, or is this going to be the end of the line? The Bucs almost went to the Super Bowl against the Rams and Kurt Warner, right? They came very close. They were in the NFC Championship. And I wondered then, are we going to be happy with this?
Right. Yeah.
Because we could easily be happy with this.
For sure.
Fill in the stands. The owners could back off and not care, but they doubled down.
Yeah.
They gave draft picks for John Gruden.
Yeah, it was a big deal.
We sacrificed the next 5 years of football to win that Super Bowl, right? And all those, Keenan McCardle and Keyshawn Johnson and Simeon Rice, they cost picks. They cost money. Mm-hmm. And, they knew we could do this now, and they did. And I think the great thing about 02, the poetic justice, who was the general manager but Rich McKay? John McKay's son, right?
Absolutely.
I can't imagine the joy he must have felt. I couldn't get through to interview him. I can't imagine. I assume it was probably like the coach in Miracle on Ice. He couldn't take they win the Miracle on Ice and he runs into the bathroom and weeps.
Right.
He doesn't want it. He can't even handle it. I can't imagine what Rich McKay felt growing up in the Bucs household, having his whole life defined by the Buccaneers to finally win that Super Bowl. He was like an exorcist. Right.
Yeah.
So the 02s to me are just there's another degree of history that they had to defeat, not just the Eagles and not just the Raiders. They had to defeat a lot of history that Tom Brady didn't even think about.
Yeah, I mean, Tom Brady came in with that Super Bowl pedigree. He didn't have to worry about the 70s or the 80s or being bad. It was all good. But yeah, that 02 Bucs defense, I mean, my goodness, probably Probably one of the best defenses ever, if we're being honest.
I mean, and what I think is great too now is you hear all these people around the country love Bucko Bruce. They love the
Mm-hmm.
In the 80s, nobody went, hey, I'd love to have one of those jerseys. You know what I mean? Like those jerseys existed in Tampa Stadium only.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And now people are like, oh, I love the creamsicles. Well,
yeah. I mean, there's a clip of Allen Iverson courtside at a basketball game in a Doug Williams jersey. Like and he's clean. Like he's like, he's in a creamsicle Doug Williams jersey. It's the coolest thing ever. So yeah, it's definitely on the vogue, as they would say.
Before that, I was never an Iverson fan, and since then, it's like post career, I'm like, he's my dog.
Oh yeah,
he's once I saw that, I'm like, I love that guy. I mean,
it's AI.
So my vote would be to get rid of these Bucs uniforms. I was all for them in the 90s when they were, transforming and fighting that history. And, I was all for them. Absolutely. But since then, I want to go back.
Yeah.
I think that's our franchise. That's the history of the team.
For sure.
It was Bucko Bruce was designed by a Tampa Tribune cartoonist.
Right. Yeah.
The colors were to represent Florida oranges. And they were chosen by local sports dignitaries, local people, all sat around and they had a say. And they wanted orange. This is fascinating for sports fans. They wanted orange to represent Florida oranges, but they didn't want an orange like the Dolphins, and not like a FAMU orange.
Right.
They wanted something softer, and a local Leonard Levy, a local printer, had a color wheel, and he had just seen the ABA Miami Floridians. You know what I'm talking about? LeBron, when he played for the Heat, wore those jerseys. It's like fuchsia and orange.
Right.
And he goes, I like this orange. How about that orange? And so that orange you're wearing now was from the ABA Floridians.
Hey, there you go.
Yep, and the different shades of the red or the burgundy were from USC for John McKay.
For sure.
And so that's how the Bucs colors came together in Bucko Bruce, which is all Tampa, right? It's a Tampa. I don't know. I urge the Buccaneer team. I don't know if anyone's ever read my book with the Bucs. I've never heard from anyone. I doubt I'll be invited to the 50th anniversary.
Yeah,
I'd like to. I sent a book to them all.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I really urge them to go back to the original Bucs uniforms and helmet because it's Tampa, and Florida needs to engage its history. We don't really feel much history in Florida because no one's from there.
Yeah, it's a bunch of
and I think let's go back to the Tangerine Dream. That's the creamsicles.
Yeah, I mean, even if it's just like kind of a pseudo retro thing, like that. They
right.
They don't have to commit wholly to it, but just like a little bit of a callback. That'd be awesome. Yeah,
I like when Tennessee had their matte gray, Tennessee football. Yeah, they went with that Tennessee orange and matte gray, and I thought, God, I love those gray uniforms with the Bucko Bruce right there. That would be the hottest football uniform, or black. With Bucko Bruce, come on! I mean,
that'd be clean. Yeah.
I'm ready to get rid of the pewter as much as it's served Tampa well. I'm an early Buck guy. You see in the background, I have a fitted hat.
That's
Buck
right.
Hat. I'm the only one in Texas who wears it. I'm the only one here.
There you go. Yeah. Well, before we log off, I'd love to hear your thoughts on. Do you have any thoughts at all on the current Bucs, like how they've been playing or their future or anything like that?
Yeah, I don't follow it as much, unfortunately. And I hate to say that. I do follow the team. I watch when they're in the playoffs. I watch their bigger games. Right you're inundated. I live in Dallas, Fort Worth, and we're just forced to. We're forced to watch America's team in every way. It's in our face, beyond the pale, the way people are here. But I do follow the Bucs when they play Dallas. I certainly watch. I have to say this: after the Bucs won in 2002, I felt so much release that it made me less of a fan in that we finally had exercised those demons.
Right. Yeah. It's like when we reached the top.
Religiously, right? I mean, I'd study the draft. I'd study who they were going to get, who they got, I'd look at their salary cap. I used to really do like you would. And all through grad school, all through college, I studied the hell out of the Bucs. And once they won, it was weird. I just was like, it's all good. Bucs lost. Oh, well. And I used to just, my day would be ruined when the Bucs lost.
Yeah.
Once they won that Super Bowl, it was like, it's all good now. We're not the Yucks, and so when Brady pushed through and they kind of surprisingly, they surprised everyone. And I mean, they were good enough to be there. We realized after the fact, but when they pushed through and won, it was like, damn, they won.
Yeah. Right.
And I was thrilled, absolutely over the moon. But I found that the 0-2 was such a big deal for me. I'm old. A lot of your fans don't even remember the 0-2 team. But
right.
Once they won that, someone my age and older will know what I'm talking about. That
for sure. No, absolutely.
Buck journey became less urgent once they won that Super Bowl. It didn't matter. I didn't care if they lost 10 years in a row. We're Super Bowl champions.
Right.
You can never take that from us. And so I don't watch them as much now. But I was thrilled this year with Baker. I mean, come on. That was awesome. He played lights out. I hope we keep him. I've been reading, I read recently that they may or may not keep him. I don't know what's going to happen with that, but I would love to see someone win another Super Bowl with Mike Evans.
Oh yeah. That'd be
while
great.
He's still able to do it.
Right.
And he is shockingly awesome.
Yeah.
All these years, it's like you take him for granted how great he is.
Absolutely.
I mean, top 3-4 Bucs ever. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
No question. One of the greats. And so anyway, that's the limit. I don't want to put my foot in my mouth and get people mad or, I have nothing but good things to say about the Bucs. And I hope they push through. I hope we build on this instead of just disappearing. That's one of the things that turns me off at the NFL, that you can, make a sudden appearance. I hope the Lions come back. I love this story. Yeah. I don't want it to disappear. And that often happens in the league where there's so much parity.
Yeah.
In spite of the teams at the top, that we're still seeing the same teams.
Right.
I hope the Bucs don't go 8-8, 8-9 next year. Or it's easy to just be one game below or one game ahead. I hope we build on this.
For sure.
Without knowing salary cap issues, without knowing injuries. And I really hope we do. I don't want to see mediocrity. Give me a horrible team that I can love, or give me a great team. But
no in the middle.
Don't go 8-9. No way. I can't take it. So
right. Yeah, I don't blame you. Mediocre is definitely not fun to watch.
Right?
Yeah, it's definitely kind of boring. But
I think.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think so. Right? Don't give me mediocre. I look at the NBA and it's like, oh my God, how many 500 teams are there?
A lot of.
I don't want to know who's 7th in the West. Right. No thanks. I'd rather watch Netflix. Right? I mean,
right? Yeah.
Give me something. Give me something I really want to see. And sometimes losers can be just as winners. And so that was the kind of the thing in my book. I wrote a book on the worst car ever. I wrote a book on land development and failure in Florida. Winners are easy to write about. Look at all the books that were on the genius of Bill Belichick. I don't want to read about it. I don't want to read about it. It's passé. It's done. It's tiring. I don't write. They call the lives of saints hagiographies, right? The lives of a saint, life of a saint. I don't want to write that. I don't think people are saints. People are good and bad at all times. And in losing, you see what makes a person. You see what makes a person tick, and
absolutely.
And the travails of losing are just as fascinating to me as the glories of winning. You know what I mean? And so that's why I love these early Bucs. It's just phenomenal.
For sure. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time, Jason. We really appreciate you coming on. This was awesome. We'll definitely have to have you back. Maybe the next time the Bucs win the Super Bowl, you'll have to write another book. You know what I mean?
Yeah, maybe I will. I still think there needs to be a story about the 80s when, Bo Jackson and Vinny Testaverde and Tampa was so brutal. One last funny story when some of your older fans remember this. Vinny Testaverde was the number one pick. He was an awesome quarterback in Miami. He was awesome. Heisman winner. Bucs pick him, and they give him all this money, and it looked like they're going to really try hard, and he suffered. You know, he really suffered.
Yeah.
And it came out that he was colorblind.
Yeah.
So all the fans are like, oh, that's why he's throwing so many interceptions, right? Right. And somebody and I believe it was at Malfunction Junction, you know, at I-4 and 275.
Yep.
Somebody paid big bucks for a billboard, and it said, "Vinny thinks this is blue." I mean, that's you know, that's the generation I really need to write about. You know, the Yucks part due. I think see if I find an editor who wants to do it. Maybe if some of your listeners or viewers want that book, they can let me know. But
absolutely,
the Yucks part two, and coming of Tony Dungy and John Gruden, and you know, maybe we need to do that book. I think it's fascinating. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of new books, do you have any stuff that you want to plug or anything?
No. I working on random stuff on Florida, and my next book's on true crime in Florida. It's on a little case in the town of Arcadia in DeSoto County that was brutal, that kind of put this town in the national spotlight, and darker than this. But I love Florida history. I love, you know, I love stories that tell us about the wider history of our state. And, you know, the Bucs do that. You know, it wasn't just the team, but the area that I wrote about. And so, you know, not really a plug, but that's a book coming.
No, hey, keep it on the lookout. So definitely, if you're listening, definitely check that out. And like I said, we really appreciate you having you on, sure, Jason. And we'll have to have you on again. And until next time, we'll catch you later.
All right. Thank you, Carter.
Yes, sir. All right. That was it. That was the interview with Jason Vuic. Hope y'all enjoyed it. Like I said at the beginning of the episode, we'll be back next week with the NFC draft review. We'll be getting to all the three different teams, all the Bucs rivals. You know, they'll be playing them twice next year each. And so there's a lot to talk about, because the division rivals certainly had some interesting things to say, some interesting things to do with the NFL draft, especially those dang Falcons. I mean, my goodness, they really made a mess of things. So we'll get into all of that next week. We'll also take a look at the rest of the NFL too. So definitely stick around for that. And as always, you know, definitely hit that like and subscribe button, and give us a follow on our social medias at RBLR Bucs or at RBLR Sports. So we really appreciate y'all for tuning in. Hope y'all enjoyed the interview. We'll see y'all next week. Go Bucs.
Thank you for tuning into this presentation by RBLR Sports. On your way out of the stadium, please remember to like and subscribe.